Welcome to the Mike Litton Experience podcast. Mike has over 31 years experience in real estate, finance, and investing. He's passionate about being a father, a teacher, a realtor, an investor, and a leader. Everyone has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. And now, introducing the host of the Mike Litton Experience, Mike Litton.
So what can you expect from the Mike Litton Experience? You can expect stories that will inspire, motivate, advice that will sharpen your focus, and expert information on real estate, finance, and market conditions. Tucker Miller, thank you so much for being our guest on the Mike Litton Experience. I'm super excited for our time together, and I can't wait to talk about this book, The First Four Words, right?
I can't wait to tell you about it, Mike.
Like we talked about before we hit record, everybody has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. So with your permission, we're going to start with where you were born, go up to today, and then we want to talk about this amazing book that you've written.
Sounds good. You want me to start with where I was born?
Absolutely.
Are you going to ask me the year?
No.
Okay. You'll notice pretty quickly that there's a lot of questions that'll get me to the current day. So you might be figuring that out as we go along. But I was born in Tucson, Arizona, and I lived there for 6 weeks.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Where'd you go after Tucson?
I went briefly to Ohio to where my parents were, because my dad was going back into military training and had a very young wife who was all alone with a very new baby. So I got parked with my mom, and we were with her family for a few weeks, and then we moved on to Texas, and then Nebraska, Missouri, Alabama, which we went to twice, not because it was so wonderful, no offense to anyone in Alabama, but we had sort of a hard row in that. Lived in California, Washington, came back to Washington later in life, but also
Washington
had
State?
Washington State, had
Okay.
another stint in Alabama, and then Colorado, and then back to Washington. And then I, as an adult, out of college, lived in Oregon for a little bit, came back to Washington. And when I was in high school, there was the threat of another move.
Mhm.
And my dad decided to take a solo trip to Saudi Arabia for a year rather than disrupt our family when we were juniors and seniors in high school. So I know that's a long answer to where I was born, but
No
I
worries.
feel like if you were going to ask me where do I think I'm from, I have no idea. But I've lived most of my life on the West Coast.
I got you. So what was your favorite thing about growing up on the West Coast?
Yeah, I will say the places where my family collectively thrived together were always the best places.
Yeah.
So the West Coast, we were here the longest, and we were
Mhm.
here in California. Of course, I lived in Oregon on my own, and then lived in Washington. But those three areas were places of tremendous growth and where collectively we thrived.
Mhm.
And the only other state that I could say that when I was young was in Denver, Colorado. That was another place where everyone did well. And sometimes we'd move places and one or two people would be struggling. And when, you know, this being a family person, when one person's hurting, we're all kind of hurting and we're not functioning as well. So the West Coast consistently was home and a place where everyone seemed to thrive together.
Gotcha. So where did you go to high school?
I went to high school in Washington, so in Mercer Island High School.
Okay.
And Mercer Island is a small island in the middle of Lake Washington.
Mhm.
And you probably heard of Microsoft. So Microsoft's east of Seattle, just across the lake. And then Seattle is on the Puget Sound side. And right smack in the middle is Mercer Island, kind of in the middle of the lake there. And I went to high school there.
Can I ask you a question about that area of
Yeah.
Washington State? Is Gig Harbor the most beautiful place on the planet, or is it just my
Oh
imagination?
my. So it's so funny that you mentioned that, because I think it would be a wonderful place for my husband and I to move to. I love it. So it's south of where I'm at. It's very, very beautiful. And I just happened to be uh, going to an Airbnb on Friday for 3 nights with our extended family to just hang out along the water at this beach house. And it was the destination of choice. So I think I'm with you.
It absolutely was breathtaking to me.
It's
Absolutely.
breathtaking. So much of Washington is
Yeah.
breathtaking, but it's
And
breathtaking
Oregon
and it
too,
has a
right?
nice community and it's just, you're on the sound, so it's not the coast. It has its own sort of special enclave
Yeah.
feeling about it. I love it.
Unbelievable how pretty it is. Okay, sorry. I didn't mean to get off track.
Yeah, that's
But
fun. I'm
in
glad
high
you know
school,
the area.
in high school, did you have a favorite subject?
I probably had favorite teachers more than I had a favorite subject,
That
and I
was my
had
next question.
amazing teachers. I had amazing teachers. So I am, 750 some days in my Duolingo Spanish journey, and it's kind of a revival of the high school Spanish that I took with a teacher that I had, and she just, I loved her. She was just so great. And then I had an English and humanities teacher who I just learned had passed in the last year or so, and she was a force
Yeah,
and she was just really great. So English, literature, art history, she did it all and she made it come to life. It was really fun.
that's awesome. That's awesome. So you graduate from high school. Where do you go?
Mhm. Well, at that time when I graduated from my high school, I was a little bit on my dad was always my mentor, coach, person, and still is. He spends a couple hours every week with me at my dining room table over cinnamon roll and coffee, and we chew the fat.
Mhm.
And so he's still a big part of my life. But at that time, he was really, my advisor. And he was also in Saudi Arabia for that
Mhm.
year. And so I was kind of left to my own devices a little bit. And I also knew that I was going to college. I'd never had a day in my life where I didn't know that. That was very much ground into me by my family, which was fine. It wasn't a decision I had to make. And I also knew that it had to be a college that I could put myself through. And
Mhm.
so the one college that I applied to was the only college that I could really see myself affording to go to, and that was University of Washington, 10 miles away.
Wow.
And as it turns out, it was an amazing school to be 10 miles away from. And I was able to put myself through school and studied business and really enjoyed it. But I wasn't, I was with a bunch of business majors
Mhm.
and they were going finance and computer science and all these things. And there was this little tiny slot in the business school for business, government, and society. And
Mhm.
I loved the sociology part of it. I
Mhm.
didn't know where it was going to go, but I took that direction. And by the time I was a senior in college, it was very clear that I wanted to go on to law school. So just sort of I'm a big fan of the organic yes. You
Mhm.
just kind of take the next step without necessarily seeing the whole story and tends to get you where you need to go.
That's awesome. So, what was your favorite thing about studying your undergrad at University of Washington?
Can I say the social life?
Of course you can.
I had
Whatever your
so
favorite
much
thing is,
fun.
that would
All
be your
right.
favorite thing, right?
I had so much fun experimenting and playing, different roles and trying on different personalities. I had been such a very good girl, so studious, play by the rules. I grew up with a military officer as a dad. I was high performing in school, always trying to get A's. And, I'd moved so much as a kid. It was just, what is the recipe for success here? Follow the recipe, stay within the lines. Dun, 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 dun.
Right.
And when I got to college, particularly the first 2 years I lived at home, but the second 2 years I moved out and I just had some room to breathe and start to discover a little bit more of myself. And also when I was early in college and coming out of high school, I was working 20 hours a week on top of everything else. So, I stayed inside the lines, but my life was structured where there wasn't a lot of extra room. But
Right.
by the time I moved out, I maybe for a time was a tad bit rudderless, but that was a good experience too. I needed that,
Good for you.
especially since I decided to go to law school and that all went away. So I'm glad I had a couple of years of just really having fun.
Where'd you go to law school?
I went to school in Salem, Oregon at
Mhm.
Willamette University College of Law. So I went from the very large public school to a small private school in Oregon, similar Western community culture, but very, very different college experience.
What made you choose that school?
It was the one I got in. But
Thanks,
again,
everything.
it's sort of the same story. It's like applied to a few, but it was the one I got in and the one that I could again afford to put myself through school. And
Yeah.
they offered scholarship, and I was still making my own way through that. And I really thank my parents for it. They didn't have any extra dough to throw at my university. And when I went to law school, that just disrupted any plan that they would have had for me academically. And as hard as it was to put myself through school, it's really one of my proudest accomplishments that,
Mm,
it will ensure clarity and
mm,
commitment, at least for me, very quickly.
yeah.
And I was determined to find my way through it and did.
So same question as University of Washington. What was your favorite thing about law school?
I I swear, I don't know. I absolutely hated law school.
Really?
I just hated it.
Why?
But there were it was such a grind,
Mhm.
and it was so intense, and it was very intensely competitive, and it was just, for a type A personality that's always been at the top of her class, the pressure was on from the beginning, and I was with everybody else who was wired like that for the
Yeah.
most part.
Yeah.
So, I just never felt like I could stop looking over my shoulder. There was always, somebody coming and the threat of not doing well. And I wanted to I put a lot on myself
Mm.
to be successful, and I made it more difficult. Sometimes my husband says sometimes he'd like to go back to high school and do it all over again. I'm not that person. I wouldn't want to do law school over again, but I do know how to help people who might be in that
Mm.
because there were some really, really good lessons learned. And I think my favorite piece of it was just some of the life skills I learned and the relationships that I built by way of support and personal growth that helped sustain me through that time.
That's cool. So after you graduate from law school, where do you go?
Well, while I was in law school, I was asked to intern, or if I wanted to intern at an insurance company here in the Seattle area.
Mhm.
And they liked Willamette grads. And so they made an exception and thought it might be nice to try out having an intern. So I interned them. It was insurance defense. They offered me a job as soon as I got out of law school. I don't have to look for a job or apply anywhere. They
Mhm.
like me. I already know them. I'll try this. And
Mhm.
as a brand new lawyer, it got me in the courtroom faster than any other way. And
Right.
so I thought, when you asked me what did I like in law school, the trial competitions were absolutely the most fun. They were
Oh,
on
the mock
top of
trial stuff?
everything
Yeah.
else.
Yeah.
But yeah, just where you got to you know, talk the talk and perform a little and do the work that we all see on TV, which is not what the life of a lawyer really looks like. That was kind of fun. So this got me closer to that.
It's not all glamorous, huh?
It is not glamorous, especially if you're doing doctor's depositions and reading medical records. It is not for me.
A little dry.
So
It's a little dry.
yeah, and voluminous,
Yeah.
voluminous.
No
Yeah,
kidding.
just
No
piles
kidding.
and piles.
So you go to work for the insurance company. How long were you with them?
Well, I was with the legal department for 5 years.
Mhm.
And I remember having this professor in law school, and I said, I just really don't know if this is for me. And he says, someone like you owes the profession 5 years. And that just stuck in my head. He said, we need more people like you with your values and your whatever it was, but you owe the profession 5 years. And boy, when I hit that 5 year mark, I was looking for something else. And there were some other reasons for that. And I stayed with the insurance company that I was with. And it was interesting making this career transition. There was, you could throw everything out on the table and just change everything up. I think of it as sort of a dashboard. Do I
Mhm.
want a whole new dashboard or do I want to just adjust a few knobs? So
Right.
maybe if I turn the volume down on this, I could do something on this. And I had an opportunity to move into the risk management department. And so I was involved in various insurance and safety issues, a variety of things in that corporate environment, which gave me a lot of exposure to different parts of the company. And I love business. So this was great.
Yeah.
And then HR came knocking and said, "Have you ever thought of working in HR? We need someone to manage our litigation and advise our our HR business partners on various issues." And that sounded totally like me. And I liked the people there. I liked the things they were doing. I liked the stories that weren't about hazardous waste sites. They were about people and how they get along with each other. And I just thought, yeah, sign me up. So I ended up being at the insurance company about 17 years,
Wow.
but I had multiple careers
Right.
while I was there.
Right. So after you leave the insurance company, number one, what makes you leave? Number two, where did you go?
So one of the things in the insurance company role that I was in HR, I was always, looking for the resolution, but also protecting the company a lot. And there were some hard spinning sometimes that had to happen to get all this stuff navigated. And it started to take a toll. I
Mm.
also at that time had two small children that were at home with me. And one of the first things my son said after I left my company, he says, "You're a lot nicer now." So I think I wasn't maybe functioning as well. I knew I was getting kind of burned out.
Yeah.
So I was looking around at different options and I thought, well, I'll just try putting a shingle out, going in business for myself and see what happens. And I love the company I was with. I love the people that I was with, but I was really ready to just kind of take a pause, recover a little bit from some of the burnout and stress that had accumulated, and then just start leaning into the story that I wanted to tell, as opposed to constantly reconstructing and polishing somebody else's story.
Gotcha.
So I went into that, but that didn't last very long because one of the companies I was working with came knocking and said, "We think you should come and work with us." And around that time, my husband had said, "Remember when you used to get a paycheck every 2 weeks? That was really nice." It was so reliable. You're in real estate, so but
Mhm.
it was so reliable and we could predict it. We had kids in daycare and all these kinds of things. And so when this other company came knocking saying, you've been a great resource for us and you've been a great contractor, would you come and consider working more directly for us? And that was with a training solutions company. And I totally am in alignment with a lot of the work that they do. And that ended up being, when was that? 2007-ish. And I still am working with them, but in a different capacity. But I spent about 17 years in house working with them as an employee. And then I continued to contract consult with them. And it's been a real pleasure.
That's awesome.
And that takes me to today. How long did this take?
That's
I
a
told you it was gonna be a story that adds up because
yeah.
I've been doing this stuff for a long time.
So at some point you make the decision to write a book called The First Four Words. What talk about because there are people that are listening to this guaranteed that are thinking about writing a book. What made you, number one, what was the mindset that made you decide to do this? And what was the thought process you went through to do it?
So the first part of it was the decision to leave the company that I was with to start my own business once again. So I still had that passion. And, you know, it was during the shutdown that I was hiking and thinking. I used to travel 70% of my time. So when the shutdown happened, I suddenly found myself with a whole lot of time on my hands, and my kids were launched. And so I was hiking and thinking a lot about, where do I want to go? And there were two questions that I asked. And what's the regret I don't want to have? And who are the people I want to hang out with? And those two questions were the beginning of what I didn't know would turn into the book. But they were the things that prompted me to say, I really need to start my own business. I still have something to say. I'm in the last phase of my life, career life anyway, and I want to leave a legacy working very specifically to help other people overcome some of the challenges that I had at different times in my life and challenges I'd seen so many other people have. So I started my executive coaching work. And the first 2 years went very well. So this was in 2021. And then we had kind of a shaky economy situation happen. Everyone I knew said, I don't know what just happened, but I don't have any work. And I had been talking with a publisher a little bit before that, and they were excited about my book concept. I got some great feedback. I kind of held back because I was doing all this other work. But with the economy slowing down, I thought, if I was ever going to write this book, which was a bucket list wish, I don't keep a bucket list, but this was always, I wish I could write a book. One day I want to write a book. I don't know what to write a book about. But on all those hikes that I had, the book came to me. And when I talked to the publisher, they were very interested in it. And I thought, this is the time to write the book. And so between August of 2023 and December of 2023, I was head down writing the manuscript for the book. And the thing that made me want to write it, besides always wanting to write a book, is as I worked with clients, and I was working with senior executive clients frequently, and very capable, very powerful. They have achieved a lot. But when I would work with them and suggest maybe you need to have a conversation with someone, or could you give them the feedback, or maybe that's something that you want to ask somebody about rather than just kind of go with what's on your mind, I would hear something really consistently. Yes, I should have the conversation. Yes, I will have the conversation. But when we would come back, they didn't have it. And I would say, why didn't you have that conversation? And what over and over came up was, well, I didn't know what to say. It is not a vocabulary problem, people, but that's what they kept telling me. I didn't know what to say. And I thought while I was out there hiking, how do I solve this problem? Because it's so consistent where people are just stopping short of getting to the other side of everything they want to have happen. And the thing that's stopping them is not having the conversation, not even trying, not even getting off the couch to have the conversation. So weirdly, while I was hiking, I had this idea that came to me, or it was divine gift. I don't know which. I'll take whatever it was. But
we hope you enjoyed another episode of the Mike Litton Experience. If you did, do us a favor, smash that subscribe button, tell your friends, family, and coworkers about our program, and wherever you get your podcasts, please leave us a rating. It helps us to connect with quality people just like you.
And that's a wrap. Another episode of the Mike Litton Experience in the books. Reach out to Mike on Instagram at Litton Realty. Want to meet with Mike? Check out calendly.com/Rio760.